Hello and welcome. On behalf of the College of Arts and Humanities History Department, the Africana Studies Program, and UCF Alumni, we thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Portia Dossi, a double history alumna from the University of Central Florida, and a staff historian at the National Park Service in the Office of the Chief Historian here in Washington, D.C., where I help manage the African American Civil Rights Network through our digitization, public programming, and more traditional historic preservation efforts. I am honored to participate in this lecture that honors Dr. John T. Washington, a humanitarian, a leader, and community activist who left an impactful legacy with UCF. This evening's lecture is titled Uprooting Racism, an evolution of hip-hop and hip-hop nation story. As a scholar of the Black freedom struggle and a hip-hop fan, the connection between the modern civil rights movement and early hip-hop is evident. Artists expanded upon existing social critiques to continue to challenge the issues of poverty and racism. Music as a form of protest has always been part of the African American struggle for liberation. Hip-hop follows the many genres that came before it that served as an outlet to express Black pain, Black love, and Black joy. As scholars continue to explore the significance of hip-hop, it's exciting to see how the field grows and where it can go from here. Before hearing from our lecture speaker, let's pause to pay tribute to Dr. John T. Washington. Lyman Brody, Executive Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, will now join us to share Dr. Washington's legacy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this lecture series on John T. Washington. There are many titles used to describe Dr. John T. Washington: professor, colleague, minister, student advisor, and/or community leader. The manner in which he lived his life was a vivid example of altruism to whomever he encountered. He looked for ways to serve others and did so with great sincerity. For those who knew him personally, their recollections of him are unfading. Dr. Washington was an associate professor of sociology at UCF, but he was much more than just a professor to his students. Students saw that Washington was passionate about what he taught and were drawn to him. According to his colleagues, it was not uncommon to find a line of students outside of his office waiting for his counsel. Washington was also instrumental in the development of the Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, the African American Student Union, and the Office of Multicultural Academic and Support Services. He also served as the advisor to many of the student organizations at the time, that was FTU, who at the time were at the forefront of the struggle to strengthen minority representation on the UCF campus. Washington was also a community leader and activist. He had the unique ability to bring their diverse populations together to work for the good of the community. He worked with several community organizations such as the Orlando Housing Community, the NAACP, the Orlando Metropolitan Urban League, and the Mayor's Minority Business Task Force. He was particularly passionate about the Meals on Wheels program, which provided meals for Orlando's elderly. His efforts were publicly recognized when he received the Jefferson Award for his leadership and volunteerism in community service. This evening's lecture upholds his spirit and legacy and the university's collective commitment to diversity, scholarship, and service. Thank you all for being here and participating in this most important program here at UCF.
Dean Brody, thank you for sharing Dr. Washington's legacy. I am Glenn Samuels, Library Technical Assistant and Community Outreach Chair for the College of Arts and Humanities Alumni Board, and I have the pleasure of recognizing the UCF History Department and Africana Studies program's commitment to honoring Dr. Washington's legacy by awarding scholarships to students studying Africana Studies. The John T. Washington Scholarship Award for Africana Studies Minors awards a student minoring in Africana Studies. This year's winner is J. Olivia Noel. Olivia a senior diversity studies major and Africana Studies minor from Gainesville, Florida, plans to pursue a Master of Education in Instructional Design after graduating from UCF. In their personal statement, Olivia writes that their personal values all center around inclusion and accessibility, and that they hope to increase inclusivity in academic environments and institutions by supporting the implementation of diverse pedagogies in fields such as medicine and business that have long been less accessible to minority students. The John T. Washington Community Service Award awards a student minoring in Africana Studies who demonstrates a commitment to serving the Central Florida community. This year's winner is Jordan Feld. Jordan Feld, a senior, is majoring in sociology and Latin American studies and minoring in Africana Studies. Jordan became heavily involved in activism for racial justice in the Orlando community following the death of George Floyd in May 2020. He states that race and racism is a global issue that needs to be recognized and addressed, and that throughout the course of my aspiring career in sociology and academia, I wish to dedicate my life to fighting for the justice of human rights. In the future, Jordan says that he seeks to pursue a PhD and fulfill my aspirations as a sociologist and human rights journalist. In partnership with UCF Business Services, the UCF History Department offers the UCF Africana Studies Business Services Dining Stipend. The award includes an all-access 7-day meal plan in UCF's dining halls, as well as dining dollars to be used at any UCF Dining Services restaurant. We have 2 stipend winners this year, Jamar Miller and Jasmine Harris. Jamar Miller, a junior communications major and Africana Studies minor from Apollo Beach, Florida, says that being involved in the community is my core value and what I do as a servant leader, and that volunteering through UCF organizations such as the John T. Washington Honor Society, Caribbean Students Organization, Gospel and Cultural Choir, and Alpha Kappa Psi fraternity has taught me how to give back and serve the community just like Dr. John T. Washington. Jamar plans to pursue a future career in marketing after he graduates from UCF. Jasmine Harris, a senior from Boynton Beach, Florida, is majoring in actuarial science and minoring in Africana Studies and statistics. Jasmine joins us this evening to introduce our speaker. Congratulations to Jasmine and all of our award recipients.
Thank you, Mr. Samuels. It is my honor to have received this award. I too also congratulate my peers. I'd like to begin by sharing an excerpt from a book I won from Yale University's African American Cultural Center and Wellness Center. I once read that when Dr. King was examined post-death, he was found to have the heart of a 65-year-old. He was only 39. To say his heart was heavy and weary is an understatement. To say it was weighted is to misstate the magnitude of the load. It doesn't diminish his legacy or his battle for human and civil rights for all. If we, for this singular moment, ponder the impact only race had on the sustained wear and tear within his heart, who can calculate the ways that stress and trauma of racism clogs one's arteries, creating blockages and inhibiting access to deeper inner movement? The name of this book is Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma by Dr. Gail Parker. Studying the African diaspora has helped me grow as a yoga teacher by exploring how a restorative yoga practice can alleviate emotional wounds from ethnic, race-based stress and trauma. I've also gained a more confident sense of self, and my ability to analyze and think critically has improved. I took the Evolution of Hip Hop course with Professor Harrell and found it fascinating how the cultural phenomena of hip hop comprised of so much intersectionality. The writing prompts allowed me to explore the many ideas and links I found within the coursework. I felt as if I had unlocked some code and hoped everyone else could see hip hop's connections to Africa. I now have the pleasure of introducing my former professor and this evening's speaker, UCF Africana Studies Professor Donald Harrell. He is a lifelong learner with a professional career that includes significant experience as an administrator, educator, arts organization executive board member, producer, director, performing artist, and arts activist. His work is and has been aimed at using education as a primary tool in the effort to eradicate racism and other types of oppression. He is the co-founder of Foresee African Folklore, an awe-inspiring African adventure rooted in the history, culture, and traditions of Africa, inclusive of folk tales, legends and myths, spirited drumming, dance and song, children's games, lectures on special topics, and a healthy dose of the obligatory African tradition of audience participation. The nationally and internationally acclaimed Performing Arts and Educational Initiative was founded in 1986 with the express purpose of sharing the beauty and poignancy of African and African American life and culture. Thank you for joining us today, Professor Harrell.
Long before time, before hours, minutes, and seconds, on the continent of Africa, the rhythm of the earth beat for us, the first people. The earth filled the air with spirit. The spirit rose on the wind and flew into our bodies, and our hearts beat for the first time. We were alive. The beat moved through our bodies and pushed out through our hands. This is how our drum was born. The drum spoke to the animals and to the people. The earth's heart beat out the rhythm of all there is. We listened and sounded it back for her to hear. Next. Then men from another continent came, men who would not listen to the rhythm of the earth. They shackled us and flung us into the belly of ships, bringing us enslaved across oceans and seas. They tore us apart from one another and did not allow us to speak our own languages. We were a lost people. We were no longer free. We thought that we were no more. Then they took the drums away. Next. But cruelty did not stop the earth's heart from beating. It spoke to us still and pushed not only out of our hands, but out of our entire bodies. And we became the drums, living drums, beating for the whole world to see and hear. Next. So when we walked along the path or worked in the fields, we made our feet drums. When we sang our songs in the moonlit sky or spoke to one another, we made our voice drums. When we stitched our quilts or invented things, we made our minds drums. When we created our music, dance, painting, sculptures, and theater, we made our art drums. And when we fought for our liberation and our civil rights, we made our courage drums. We are the earth's people, the living drums, beating for the whole world to see and hear. We are alive, and we will always be free. Next. What is pointed to here metaphorically is a rhythm-centered response that manifested in the lives of enslaved Africans and their descendants, which included the use of calls, cries, and hollers, call and response devices, additive and polyrhythms, heterophony, pendular thirds, blue notes, bent notes, and elisions, hums, moans, grunts, vocables, and other oral declarations, interjections, and punctuations, offbeat melodic phrasing and parallel intervals and chords, constant repetition of rhythmic and melodic figures and phrases, game rivalry, hand clapping, foot patting, apart paying, and the metronomic sense that underlies all of the music of Africa in our effort to free ourselves from slavery, to restore our humanity, and fight for our civil rights. Next. Thousands and thousands of years from the time of their birth until they pass on to the hereafter, the lives of the people of Africa is filled with music making that is meant to make the desirable happen, music that is steeped in the rhythm of the earth and the earth's heartbeat. Over the course of the last 500 years, nearly 15 million Africans were transported against their will to the Caribbean and North, South, and Central America. Upon arrival, they were faced with untold hardships as they were made to provide free labor on plantations practically every waking moment of the rest of their lives. Their children and their children's children for many generations would suffer the same or similar fates. And in order to survive, so that their descendants could be here today, they called upon music, as did those before them, so new music was created, like salsa, calypso, rumba, samba, reggae, reggaeton, spirituals, blues, jazz, gospel, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and hip hop. And the one thing that they have in common is that they are all steeped in the rhythm of the earth and the earth's heartbeat. An American success story. Hip hop is beat-driven, African-rooted music culture that rose from a marginal 70s subculture to a 2020s global juggernaut, spanning music, language, film, television, books, fashion, sports, and politics. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry that moved decidedly from the entertainment industry to consumer products and services. Next. Hip hop is distinguished from the term rap in that it does not solely focus on spoken lyrics and was initially comprised of these 5 artistic elements. Next. 1, DJing, which is actively playing recorded music on turntables. 2, MCing, which is a vocalist who rhymes over sampling, scratching, and mixing supplied by the DJ. 3, b-boying, an athletic style of street dance consisting of 4 kinds of movement: top rock, down rock, power moves, and freezes. 4, graffiti, which is writing or drawing made on a wall or other surface, usually without permission and within public view. And 5, knowledge, which is reference to the African diasporic mix of spiritual and political consciousness designed to empower members of oppressed groups. Next. Hip hop equal change. Hip hop's commodification fostered a multiracial generation of young Americans brought up on a culture largely created by Black youth that transformed the racial dynamic of the United States, and in the opinion of many observers, may have helped to elect the nation's first African-American president. Next. Hip hop refers to the aesthetic, social, intellectual, political identities, beliefs, behaviors, and values produced and embraced by its members, who generally think of hip hop as an identity, a worldview, a way of life. Thus, across the world, hip hop heads, as members of hip hop culture describe themselves, frequently proclaim, "I am hip hop." Next. As hip hop has grown in popularity, its defiant and self-defining voices have been multiplied and amplified as they challenged conventional notions of identity and nationhood. Global hip hop has emerged as a culture that encourages and integrates innovative practices of artistic expression, knowledge, production, social identification, and political mobilization. Next. The hip hop nation is an international, transnational, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual community made up of individuals and with diverse class, gender, and sexual identities. While hip hop heads come from all age groups, hip hop culture is primarily youth driven. The hip hop nation shares the contours of what international study scholars call an imagined community. Though not a conventional community, it is a community of self that sometimes functions in this manner. Next. Hip hop versus racism. Hip hop is the last of a long list of music genres and attendant cultures developed in the context of the seemingly never-ending battle against racism. As such, hip hop is part and parcel of the liberation and civil rights struggle that comprises the sum total of the African presence in the Americas. Next. What were the global forces that created white supremacy and the systemic racism that is at the center of American life and culture and our discussion today? Next. Number 1, the papal bull, Aeterni Regis, which was issued on June 2nd, 1481 by Pope Sixtus IV, confirming the granting of all future rights to acquisitions made by Christian powers in Africa and eastward to the Indies to Portugal. Number 2, next. The papal bull Inter Caetera, which was issued by Pope Alexander VI on May 4th, 1493. It authorized Spain and Portugal to colonize the Americas and to subjugate the people found there to their will. Next slide. And number 3, the Protestant Reformation, which caused tension in Europe and ignited a competition among the European nations, which was fueled by religious fervor. It spread from the European continent throughout the Atlantic world. The tension manifested in Africa and the Americas as Europeans squabbled over land for colonies, extracting resources, converting the indigenous populations to their respective versions of Christianity, securing trading posts, and reaping profits from the extremely lucrative slave trade. Next. What is racism? It's a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race over the other. Racism is also a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles. It is also a political or social system founded on racism, racial prejudice, or discrimination. Next. In preparation for this talk, I polled the students who are now enrolled in my evolution of hip hop courses. And of the nearly 100 respondents, this is what we found out. In answer to question 1, which was, has hip hop played a positive role in uprooting racism in the past? The students or respondents answered no 15.6% of the time. 5.2% of the students answered this question as uncertain. And 79.2% of students polled answered yes to the question of, has hip hop played a role in uprooting racism in the past? Next slide. The second question posed to my evolution of hip hop students is hip hop playing a positive role in uprooting racism now? They responded at 12.5% no. 5.6% of them responded by saying that they were uncertain. And 81.9% of my current students in evolution of hip hop answered this question by saying yes. Next slide. The third and final question posed to the students was, will hip hop play a positive role in uprooting racism in the future? And I trust them to see beyond the now because they're Generation Z and the future is theirs. 9.7 of these students said no. Another 5.6 of them were uncertain. But 84.7% of the students answered yes to the question of, will hip hop play a positive role in uprooting racism in the future? You might note that when we go from the past to the present to the future, the number of yes increases significantly. And it's testament to this generation who I feel personally are the ones that we've been waiting on. Next slide. As part of this presentation, I thought it was apropos to share some of the incredibly insightful comments in support of their views made by students in my Evolution of Hip Hop class. Now, there is not enough time to give you a full sampling of them, so I selected one. And this was Spencer Tamagni. He's a senior at UCF's Burnett Honors College with a double major in math and physics. Spencer, in answer to the question of is hip hop playing a role in uprooting racism now, says, I will answer this question based on personal experience. One of the most impactful albums that came out while I was growing up was Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. This came out while I was in the 10th grade. The album contains a song that has become a protest anthem. But beyond that, it contains some personal, powerful, and truly deep reflections by Kendrick on his identity as a Black man, and how that relates to his class, profession, and role in society. Listening to this album carefully and closely allowed me to reach a new level of understanding of the forces of oppression in America. And not 2 months after it was released, the infamous police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson happened. I could then see the topics discussed on this album play out in real time and began to understand that it was not enough to just be morally opposed to racism, but that I needed to do more to act against it and turn the solidarity that I had understood as a hip hop fan into a real part of my life. Because of all this, I joined the Black Club at my high school, which was in a very racist area in a rural part of Florida. Consequently, it was a very small but closely knit club. And I learned a lot from the experiences shared by my Black peers. I reunited with a lot of these people to protest this most recent summer following the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I truly do not think I would have been involved in the protests were it not for the fact that I've been a hip hop fan for some 13 years now, which has helped to make the fight against racism a very personal one for me. From hip hop, which led me to have some of these very deep and meaningful experiences of solidarity with my friends, I have learned that the struggle is truly universal, and we should all stand up for one another when faced with injustice. It is only when we are united and in large numbers that we have the power to truly change things. Because of this deeply impactful role of hip hop in my life, I strongly believe that it has mobilized many young people from a huge array of backgrounds across the globe to participate in activism and collective action with the Black people around them, and more broadly, stand in solidarity against any form of oppression. Next slide. As an allegory to bring this talk home, I'm going back to what I found a great sense of purpose in, and that is storytelling. With this in mind, I'd like to tell you a story taken from the tradition of the African people in the country called Ethiopia, a place that's mentioned very prominently in all of our holy books. And it's also a place that's well known for its morality tales. Time was, and fire, water, good and bad lived together. One day they went hunting and they found many cattle, which they decided to share equally. But bad wanted more for himself. So he went secretly to water, and he said, "Water, you have the power to destroy fire. Do this, and we can have his share." Now, water believed this, and he went and threw himself on fire, and fire was no more. Then bad went over to good, and he said, "Fire has been destroyed. It was water who did it, so he doesn't deserve to share with us. Let's take the cattle up into the mountains and divide them equally." And so good and bad drove the cattle into the mountain. Water saw them go, and he tried to follow, but water couldn't run uphill, only down. And so they escaped. And then at a resting place, bad turned to good and said, "Foolish one, I am strong and you are weak. I am master and you are my servant. So all of the cattle shall belong to me." And good said, "I'm not your servant, and it's I who is strong." And good went forth and he struggled with bad. Now they fought up and down the mountain without either destroying the other. So they went before the wind. They asked the wind to judge who was right. The wind listened and said, "It's like this. Good is destined to struggle with bad. Good will win, but bad will return. And again, good must fight. For time immemorial, good must fight bad, because if he doesn't, he'll be lost forever." Next slide. The end.
Thank you so much, Professor Harrell, for that inspirational and informative lecture and presentation as well. I'm Anna Kephart, a community history archivist and a second-year student in the History MA program and a graduate research assistant for Africana Studies and Public History. I'll be moderating questions from the audience this evening, so please post your questions in the Q&A or chat boxes you can see at the bottom of the screen. And in the meantime, while you're submitting your questions, have a question that I'd like to start with. Dr. Harrell, you discussed how hip hop rose out of a 1970s subculture and how hip hop is part of a long line of musical genres that were part of the battle for civil rights and against racism. I'd love to hear more about what some of the forces were in the 1970s that led hip hop to branch off from the family tree and develop into its own distinct musical genre and movement.
Well, in the early 70s, there was a pushback against the civil rights movement and the gains, which were, we had the Voting Rights Bill to pass. There was an entire war on poverty with compensatory education programs. And there was because of the voting right, we began to have Black elected officials, and things were beginning to change, but there was a pushback against it by politicians who just wanted to kind of go back to the way things were. So the gains, like the youth programs, the food stamps, the summer enrichment programs, Head Start and all that kind of stuff, they thought it was untenable. And they began to take it away. And also advancements in, New York City at the time kind of push the marginalized into the less desirable areas to kind of take over lands that were inhabited by people who were not of means. And they were all kind of sandwiched off in an area together. This was the Hispanic, the Caribbean, and the African-American youth. And they had nothing but animosity toward one another. And they used hip hop to kind of, to bridge that gap and to kind of come together as one. And they also used it as a way to express their lives and what was going on in their lives. And so the answer to the question, in the sense that it is a departure, it was just a kind of new kind of thing. They just had something that they needed to say then that was a little different from the disco era, that was kind of piggybacking with some of the gains of the civil rights era. And you got the influence of something new, hip hop.
Great, thank you. We have a follow-up question from the audience from Melanie Figueroa, who asks, who were the early defining artists of hip hop?
Well, you know, there are three individuals who are giving a lot of credit, and they are, you know, Kool Herc, who they are saying it was a DJ who had the first party. There's Grandmaster Flash, who innovated on the turntables and kind of created a new way of using turntables as instruments. And then there was African Bambaataa, who, you know, I would say kind of led a movement away from street gang culture to a more homogenous kind of existence. And also he was an incredible a DJ as well. And those are the three who are called the Holy Trinity of hip hop. But beyond that, now this was just the beginning. So this whole notion of this new type of music and the culture around it quickly spread to almost all the nooks and crannies all over the US and finally around the world. Next question.
This is also sort of a follow-up from Dr. Gordon in the history department. Would you suggest that hip hop youth was an echo of civil rights youth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was an echo because, you see, the echoes are constant from the first arrivals. And the echoes are in the different music cultures because they were all for the same purpose: liberation, civil rights, express yourself, you know, survival. And hip hop specifically was echoed a lot of the sentiments that were part of the musical use, the use of music in the civil rights movement, the freedom songs and so on and so forth, some of the poetry and creative utterances that were part and parcel of the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the student youth movement, were incorporated into hip hop. It was just an expansion or further development of the old and making it into something new. Yes.
Thank
Another
you.
question?
Yes, we have several. Everyone's really interested in learning more.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. I'm elated.
Joshua Goodridge wants to know, who are some of your favorite hip hop influencers or artists?
You know, I'm a conscious guy. Long before there was hip hop, I made a turn as a youth to say, hey, I'm going to make sure that my life counts for something. So I've been sitting at the crossroad, at the intersection of arts and activism for an awful long time. And as such, I'm more inclined to the hip hop artists who have conscious rap, or and there have been so many of them over the course of such a long time. I've been teaching this course for 10, 11 years now, that that's a very difficult answer. I do like the fact that Kendrick Lamar is mentioned so prominently now. Early on, there were other folks. I kind of like the now kinds of things. And I also like the unsung. They're two different types of artists. There's a translocal and a transnational. The transnational are thinking of gaining wealth and notoriety, becoming stars, but the translocal are folks who do it for the love and for the work that the music does. And so there are many, many artists who are part of that scene, who may not be known, but they're out there doing the work in the nooks and crannies of not only the US, but all over the world.
Great. Deborah Williams asks, and you've mentioned a couple in this most recent answer, but were there any musicians who inspired your personal desire to become a part of civil rights activism prior to the rise of hip hop?
What a wonderful question.
Isn't it?
Deborah's a music teacher. I know you, Deborah, over. How you doing? Let's see. Like I mentioned earlier, every generation of African Americans have music that inspires, strength and determination to fight against oppression. In my day, many of the rhythm and blues artists incorporated political ideations in their music. Even James Brown did so. I'm sort of eclectic, so I kind of like stuff with poetry and all in it. And it's, again, a very difficult question for me because I love so much of it. It's very difficult for me, yeah.
Deborah Williams asks what your, Beatrice Vergara asks what you think about The Roots.
Oh, the group, The Roots?
Yes, the group, The Roots.
Oh, I love them. Yes. Now that I can say, that's an incredible group and stuff. I love their music. I love their sentiments, and they are definitely doing the work. They are here to use their craft to make positive change in our society. So I love them for that reason. Yes.
That leads into, we have another audience member who asks, how do you think hip hop is currently fighting racism in America?
Well, here's the thing. When racism is a philosophy that has no strength if it keeps people separate based on color of skin, color of eye, texture of hair. The hip hop generation was the very first generation to put aside all of that en masse. They've intermarried 4 times as much as previous generations. They have embraced each other across all kinds of lines of demarcation. And the hip hop generation has been around long enough to have kids who think it's okay to be with one another and to listen to certain kinds of music. They have through acculturation over time, the next generation seems just not bothered by the fact that somebody is a little bit darker than me, or the hair's a little bit different, or, he's from someplace else. And this is on steroids now because of technology. So the hip hop generation just happens to be the iteration of African music in the Americas that's happening right now when you have all of this technological wherewithal. The reach is incredible. And that's another reason that it is able to do what I just described. Yes.
Going back a couple decades, Jacob Errol asks, what are your thoughts on the Afrocentric hip hop of the 90s? Do any artists or groups stand out to you?
I was I liked like groups that kind of made those type of statements. I liked the Tribe Called Quest. I liked there was a group out of Atlanta, Arrested Development. I thought they were incredible. had a friend to do some choreography for them. Let's see if there's any others. There were some others that I thought were pretty on point, but those are the two that stand out in my mind right now. Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Deborah had a follow-up question, and it's one I share as well. What made you choose your opening song, Ship Ahoy by the OJs?
One, I couldn't find a hip hop song that didn't drop an F-bomb or something, you know? I mean, you know, I say that, you know, with all candor. No, that song sticks out to me because it is an example of rhythm and blues helping to develop consciousness toward liberation and civil rights way back in my day. And the OJs did a great job with that. And so I chose it. I mean, if I'm doing the talk, I could choose some old school music, right? So that was pretty much it. It says all of the right things. It talks about the injustice around the enslavement of the 12 to 15 million Africans that were brought to the Americas and the conditions under which they were held and the conditions in which they lived and the oppression that they underwent. And that's a really important to me, but that goes way back. It lets you know that the hip hop artists are not the first to comment on these kinds of things. Is there someone else?
Yes, they're still coming in. At what point do you think that hip hop went mainstream from more underground?
Oh boy, great answer. That was well, the first, you know, it really kind of really went over the top when Run DMC and Aerosmith teamed up and did Walk This Way, because that kicked down some walls, and that brought the larger community into the hip hop space. You know, in other words, it became cool across racial barriers at that point, in my view. That was huge. There were a few other occasions, but that one I think was probably the big thing. And again, it happened again when Dr. Dre came out with the Chronic album. I mean, it was like, I mean, you know, it became a real big pop hit, and it became really cool to embrace hip hop. And once you come in the room, then change can be made. Next question.
I actually have a bit of a follow-up question. I was curious, in your talk, you very clearly distinguished, hip hop is distinguished from the term rap. But I know that there's also groups, you know, thinking of Straight Outta Compton and sort of gangster rap that was, what led to this sort of divergence of hip hop and rap, and how does activism differ between the two genres?
Folks are just telling their story. You know, rap and hip hop are not two different genres. Rap is the music portion that can be easily commodified. You remember I showed you the 5 different things. There's b-boying, there's DJing. The rap artist became the thing because it could be commodified, and it became very easily a part of pop culture. So rap would be that music thing when someone's rapping to a beat, you know, to these layers of rhythms and scratching and all of that. But the culture that surrounds it is hip hop, which is the very same thing of all the different genres of music created primarily by African Americans. You have the music representation, but around that representation is a culture. It may or may not have a name. In this case, rap and hip hop, you know, the culture is called hip hop and you have rap. If we were looking at something like the Negro spirituals, there was a culture built around that, or blues culture, or jazz culture. You have the music, and then you have a culture that revolves around it with its own set of confines, right? Yes. Next.
We have, I think, a wonderful question from Jamal Tatum. Do you foresee an educational push for incorporating hip hop history and art into mainstream academics?
Well, yes. You know why? Because that's already the case. You know, it's already the case. It's become a discipline in and of itself, even to the point that people can get degrees in it. There's a big push that's been happening over the last 15 years, and it's you know, a lot's been accomplished. There are programs in some of the most elitist institutions in the world in hip hop studies programs, global hip hop studies programs. So yes, that has that glass barrier has been broken down. Hip hop is being taken seriously. There's a hip hop archives at Harvard. There's, you know, a lot of stuff all over the country and around the world that deals with hip hop as a real academic discipline. Well worth being a part of.
I was pleased, and also I'm only in my 30s, but it made me feel old. I was a History Day judge for middle schoolers a couple of years ago, and there was a student who did their project on NWA as a historical, and I thought that was a great, you know, that even the middle school, they're moving into that as well.
No, NWA made a big impact at the time, and those kids were just speaking their truth. You know, the special circumstances around policing and the community in Los Angeles begs comments from the youth. And so it was. I mean, you could have foresaw it. You know, you can't like continue to oppress folks without getting a reaction of some sort. And that's what happened with NWA coming out so hard and helping to coin that phrase, gangster rap.
Yeah, I was just saying too, I'm glad that it looks like it's getting integrated into, it's becoming an academic subject of study, even at the K through 12 level as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have 3 more questions, and I wish we weren't coming up on oh, actually we have more time than I thought we did. Keep the questions coming.
What do you got?
Joshua Goodridge asks, have you seen the Netflix series The Get Down? And if so, what are your thoughts on its interpretation of the origin story of Grandmaster Flash and DJing?
I like it. I love it. I've seen it, and I thought they did a great job. Some creative license, but they're telling the story. It's and that's some of the best work, either in a series such as that one, or in movies, when you take some of the real and comment on it and embellish it to make points more vivid and you know, to advance the telling of the tale. But yes, I was impressed with the fact that that particular series stays connected to the real evolution of hip hop as it occurred with Grandmaster Flash in New York during that particular period of time. So yeah, I love it.
I'll ask a follow-up. Are there any other documentaries or podcasts that you would recommend listeners and viewers?
Yes.
Out?
Yes. There's a Netflix series called Hip Hop Evolution. And I think it's a cat's meow because it's put together by hip hop heads themselves, great production, a lot of research went into it, and they let the folks who actually made the history tell their story. and it goes back and it works its way from the beginning. It'll go and they'll talk with DJ Kool Herc or Grandmaster Flash and African Bambaataa, and work their way all the way up to all the significant figures in hip hop as it transfers the continent. Incredible. It's in its third season and there are 12 episodes. It's called Hip Hop Evolution. You can check it out on Netflix. Well worth the effort. Binge watching will occur.
Great, thank you. It sounds like you recommend The Get Down as well. So there's
oh yes, absolutely.
Started.
The Get Down would be great. There's an independent film that I think is wonderful, and it's called The Hip Hop Fellow, Hip Hop Fellow, and it's made by a independent filmmaker called Kenneth Price, and it is on the incredible story of a hip hop producer called Ninth Wonder, who's out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. But it kind of follows him. He was like not only teaching a course at Duke University, but he was also selected to be a hip hop fellow at Harvard University in the very same year. And during the course of his being a fellow, he had to produce a final project. And during the course of the presentation of it, it kind of lays out turntablism and how to actually piece together those beats and those special parts of songs happens, because that's really what happens. Like these parts of different songs that have show real promise are kind of put together in a new fashion. And this movie does a great job of representing that. And it's called, again, Hip Hop Fellow by Kenneth Price.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It was fascinating to hear more in your talk about the international and transnational elements of hip hop. And we have a question from the audience. What country or community outside the United States has the strongest or largest hip hop community, and why do you think it is?
You know, that's a loaded question, because there's so much international activity around hip hop that I'm probably gonna say a couple of favorite places and I'll probably be wrong. I know Japan is very prominent. I know South Korea is very prominent. I know Senegal, the hip hop artists in Senegal, stopped a president from who wanted to have his third term when the Constitution said only 2 terms per president, and the hip hop artists actually rose up and used their art form to get people to make sure that didn't happen. So in Senegal, it's great. Ghana is really good. That's in Africa. The Arab Spring was a hip hop driven kind of reaction to oppression. South Africa has a great hip hop presence. And this is the same thing. I could go all over the world. So, and I may be wrong, but yeah, it's just become a global phenomenon. Yep. Next question. I hope I answered that one.
Yeah.
Is there a follow-up?
Let's see.
There's a German hip hop scene, someone says. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Marina Collier asks, thinking of songs like Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn or Sam Cooke's Long Time Coming as civil rights anthems, what would you say is a defining civil rights song for hip hop?
Well, like I said, I have an affinity for the students who are, the young people now, the Z. I've seen I've taught a lot of different students over a lot of different generations. And Z says that Kendrick Lamar's All Right is the anthem, the hip hop anthem. that's a part of this effort to not let oppression have its way. So Kendrick Lamar's All Right.
Are there any maybe from earlier eras, like one from the 80s, one from the 90s?
You know, I think Public Enemy, you know, did a great job with some of their tracks because they were specifically all about countering, you know, repression built around race, and they had some wonderful tracks in some of their work. Mm-hmm. Now, personally, you know, like I say, we get the commercial stuff and you see them and you hear it and you know about them, but that's not the story. The story, in my view, is the artists that you never see and hear who are doing the work. They're doing the work. They're in communities using their music to make positive change. A lot of that's going on all over the world. Mm-hmm. You were muted, Anna. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Anna?
Could you just, Melanie Figueroa asks, could you describe the earliest memory you have of hip hop impacting you?
Oh, yes. Well, here's the thing. I'm an ethnomusicologist. My whole thing is African rhythms and rhythm modalities in the Americas. I wanted to understand the significance of them, what they did in culture, how they did it, and I wanted to be able to extract meaning from that. A significant point in time came when I realized that this rhythm that I was seeking to study and were thinking of going to where people were playing traditional African rhythms and such was all around me all the time. And it was being expressed in hip hop. You hear all the time, they talk about the beat. And that's what it is. It's African rhythms and rhythm modalities put together to create something totally new. I can say definitively that the first time, you know, the question was, what was the most significant hip hop? Oh, I got a history. I've even, well, and you know, that was almost made me laugh because at one point in time, early on, I actually produced some hip hop concerts, and I had one, and I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into. I knew that there was a big audience for it and someone recommended them, and I just got them. I ended up getting Big Daddy Kane early on back in the 80s to do something for me when I lived in South Carolina. And I ended up getting Two Live Crew. I produced a show with them and had no idea as to what the content was. All I knew is that they were selling a lot of tickets, and I was completely floored when they got on stage and started doing what they did, because I'm like a preacher's son and I could not, you know, it was, you know, we had a disconnect for a moment. But as far as moving me along the road and really resonating with me, all the hard-hitting anthems, I got a big kick out of, I gotta admit, I got a real big kick out of Public Enemy. I really did, you know, because I could see beyond the surface and I really kind of understood. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Brian Doherty asks, do you see more politicians incorporating hip hop ideals into their platforms to help push forth structural change like Killer Mike and Bernie Sanders?
No, but I do see overtures. You know, I haven't noticed that specifically enough to identify it, but I do know that politicians understand Generation Z. They may not understand it in the terms that I do as to how acculturation of Black music forms, in this case, hip hop, have kind of helped to build a community of self that's broken down all the walls, you know, whether they're social class, or race, sexual identity, you know, and so on and so forth. And I think that politicians in general understands the power of the youth. Again, this Generation Z are the most educated and the most likely to not put up with racism and this white supremacy that's at the root of it. Politicians are astute enough to understand that. Yes.
Great. Deborah Williams has a question. I love Motown, so I love this question. Are there any, and I love sampling. Are there any favorite samples of music from old school hip Motown group artists or popular artists into hip hop that you can think of?
No, well, Deborah, I'm not so sure because they end up getting just the beats in there. You know, they may not, you know, sometimes you see folks using rhythm and blues tracks, you know, they'll sample pieces of it to make a statement and they'll contextualize it and make something altogether new out of it. But most often they're looking for just a small little loop in there that does something, that moves people. But the answer more clearly would say that I would not be surprised if they've used a lot of Motown's sounds to sample in music. I can't specifically identify any of them, but I'm sure that it happens more often than not.
Do you think that any of that sampling was an attempt to not only, you know, incorporate musical elements, but also to incorporate some of the earlier, you know, you talk about how there's a long line of activism in these different music genres. Do you think that sampling is ever a way to sort of harken back? We talked about echoing.
Yeah, well, what they're doing by taking something old and recontextualizing it and making something new, and that's pretty much what it is. It's like it's commenting upon something. It's like a literary nuance. You're taking something old, put it in a whole nother, do something different with it, and which is a comment upon it. And that's all sampling is. You know, I mean, it's they'll put it in a whole new context or make it help to communicate something that was included in the original intent, but to take it another step further, comment upon it. And that's a process. Mm-hmm.
We have two questions that I see as dovetailing with one another. The first one is from the audience. How important do you think lyricism is in hip hop, especially when it comes to fighting for civil rights?
I am one of those persons who puts lyricism at the top. It is what's important. You know, music can move people without lyrics, but the real knowledge and understanding that we're going to need to coalesce around, you know, fighting or struggling or against negative aspects of our cultural milieu require clear content, clear messaging. So lyricism, I think, is the best way to approach it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so engrossed in hip hop, because of the extraordinary lyricism. I'm also engrossed in the fact that as you move from one area of the country or one time period, that there are different kinds of aesthetics at play, and only a real hip hop head can even follow what's being said. A part of the legacy of Blacks in America was to be able to speak in indirection. In other words, to say one thing and mean another. it's just, you know, it's definitely a part of the legacy of slavery, because you have to kind of be a step ahead against someone who does not wish you well. And I think the use of language and this whole idea of indirection has been taken to new heights over the course of the evolution of hip hop. And I'm fascinated by it. Every time I think I've seen and heard it all, you know, the youth come up with something else. So it's incredible.
So given the importance of lyricism, Patrick Nurse asks, what are your views on the introduction of parental advisories in trying to silence the voices of artists like NWA, Public Enemy, and Two Live Crew?
Huh, what a wonderful question. At an earlier point, I probably would have made the same mistake that so many others did, is to say that this is nihilistic, you know, this is not nihilistic in the sense that, you know, looking at life as though there's no such thing as right and wrong. But after spending a lot of time studying hip hop and listening to the youth and the people who are actually a part of that culture, because it's youth driven, I've come to find the roadblocks against communication to be very disquieting and problematic. On the other hand, I do think that parenting requires a level of care with regard to what your kids consume. If it needs a label, it needs a label. You know, so that's an old person, an elder speaking. Yes.
We should always listen to our elders. So thank you. Alias Corral, I hope I'm saying that right, asks, there's a documentary on Netflix that talks about the early 90s radio show Stretch and Bobbito. In the documentary, the impact of the radio show and the music changed the music industry into what it is today. My question is that if Professor Harrell ever knew about that show and was there to experience its impact, as Elias knows that his dad was an avid listener while he was growing up.
I'm not aware of it, but I'm really interested. No, did you say Stretch?
Stretch and Bobbito. We have now 3 different documentary Netflix series, it sounds like. Elias, Alias, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing. If you could put the name of the documentary in the chat, we'll be sure to.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. I don't know a thing about it, but I would love to check it out. So would you share that with us, Elias?
All right. We have an audience question. You've been talking about music. Are there any graffiti artists that are very well known or popular?
You know, I think the answer to that question is twofold. One, I think that when you talk about hip hop, you should not minimize the impact of the graffiti artists who actually got the party started in the first place. And you should also, you have to realize that if it wasn't for the graffiti artists, hip hop would still probably be in South Bronx and, you know, isolated in Harlem. It was the graffiti artists who managed to pique the interest of the punk rockers downtown. Music followed, and they formed an alliance, and that's really a big part of the story of hip hop. Is it Basquiat? It's probably the premier graffiti artist. I think one of his works sold for only God knows. I mean, like more $1 million than I can probably, you know, a lot of zeros. So I would say it was Basquiat. He's by far the most impactful graffiti artist.
We have a follow-up in the chat. The documentary is called Stretch and Bobbito, Radio That Changed Lives. And that's on Netflix.
What market did they come out of? Is that where was that radio show? What city or town?
While we're waiting for the response.
Yeah, that answer. Go ahead. The
Yeah.
next question.
And again, I apologize. I want to pronounce everybody's name correctly. Amini Antone asks, what are your thoughts regarding people's views of hip hop and its contribution to violence?
Hip hop and its contribution to violence. You know, I'm prepared for that question. And that I think what we have to really focus on is the overarching effect of hip hop on our society. Is it a net positive? Is it a net negative? My view is that it's a net positive. The violence, the profanity, the things that you may want to, the deltas or the things that you may want to find wrong with hip hop are not a hip hop problem. They are a problem that's endemic to our society at large. And it's reflected in hip hop in many cases. When I see, you know, violence, vulgarity, or nonsense, I look at it as noise. When we talk about the effect of hip hop as a cultural form, there's a definite net positive. We can, you know, go back and forth and find some definite examples of something that's not so positive, but I'm looking at the big picture when I make my comments about hip hop.
We found, Elias said, from what I can remember, it was a local radio show out of Columbia University in New York, and it ended up growing from there. And then Tiffany Rivera in the history department found that DJ Stretch Armstrong, Adrian Bartos, and Bobbito Garcia hosted the radio show at the WKCR station at Columbia.
Okay, all right. My son went to Columbia. He probably knows. I'll call him when I leave here. I have a son that went there for several years for graduate school. Okay. Pop
quiz for him. Well, this is
Yes.
wonderful. We're coming close to the end of the program, so we just have a few more questions to wrap up. An attendee asked, what is the significance of the way they talk in the song Double Dutch Bus?
Oh, well, I think the significance is the use of every aspect of African-American life and culture to do something new. And this Double Dutch, this was used in children's games. And Double Dutch was a thing, you know, that the girls did, you know, and they have these little rhythms. Everything's in rhythm. So you're doing a Double Dutch and it's just saying, you know, little rhythms that go with it. You don't like just do the rope without having a rhythmic song to go with it. And it was a way for feminine expression to make its presence in hip hop. And once it broke in, it like took off like a rocket with people like with artists like Latifah and Queen Latifah and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Great. So this will be our last question today from Deborah Williams. If you could become an influencer to any musical genre, what would be your top points to have them lean into in order for those artists to address today's tough conversations around race relations, and social change?
I would lean into this is the urgency. For me, it's the urgency of now. So I would ask those artists to use their musical platform to inform, to help folks to not only, that's knowledge, but to really help through further understanding, and to where possible, help folks to find how to apply that which they now know and understand to the problems that plague us all. And those are the isms, you know, the racisms, the sexisms, some of them have other kinds of names, but those kinds of things that separate us, where one group or one individual kind of looks at the other as the other and therefore is not worthy. I would say use their music to get rid of that kind of approach to living in our, one with the other. Okay, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we're out of time this evening, but I really also want to thank the audience. We made it through 25 fantastic questions, and wow. It really added so much, both the questions and your answers. So thank you both for your presentation and for going into such depth with our question and answer portion. And to the audience.
Thank you. I tried not to go too far with my answers because I knew there were a lot out there, but still, I hope I was able to answer most of the questions as they came out. Yeah. Absolutely.
We'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening for our annual John T. Washington Lecture Series, and we'd like to also thank UCF Alumni for partnering to host tonight's lecture. UCF History and Africana Studies also thanks the UCF Foundation, which provides support in the continuation of scholarship awards to Africana Studies minors. To support these scholarships and honor the work and life of John T. Washington, we encourage you to help continue his legacy by giving back to Africana Studies scholarships. To make a gift, you can go to ucffoundation.org/give now, and we'll include the link in the chat with detailed instructions on how to give to this fund. A recording of this evening's lecture and question and answer will be available at the UCF Alumni Virtual Hub and on the UCF History Department's YouTube channel. Thank you, Dr. Harrell. Thank you all in the audience, and everybody have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Be safe.